I'll wait for Kelly to come back. Okay. I don't know if she wanted me to wait for her to come back. All right. All right, we're going to go ahead and get started. Good morning. Thank you all for being here. Did you see Kelly? I didn't know if she wanted me to wait for her. All right, I'm Lisa Guthrie. I'm co-chair of the Environmental Stewardship Committee, and today we have a very appropriate forum topic for Earth Month, the power of trees. We all love the shade they provide in the hot summer afternoon and the homes they provide for songbirds, but they offer many more benefits. We're going to hear more about that today. Trees filter rainwater, cool our cities, and clean the air. But the 2014 Chesapeake Bay Watersheds Agreement's goal was to expand urban tree cover and is moving in the wrong direction. The region has seen a net loss of approximately 25,000 acres in the last decade. To combat this, the General Assembly passed bills focused on preserving or planting trees in urban areas. HB 1100, sponsored by our own delegate Betsy Carr, expanded the authority of cities and counties to require developers to conserve a percentage of trees on their project sites. Sadly, Governor Youngkin vetoed the bill on April 8th. Fortunately, we have strong nonprofit organizations who are making an impact on the expansion of tree canopies in Richmond. We'll hear more about that from our guest speakers this morning. I'd like to welcome Shelley Barrett Parsons and Amy Wentz, and they can tell you a little bit more about themselves and the nonprofits that they serve. So first, when they finish their presentations, I'll ask a few questions, and then I'll open it up to you all to ask other questions of your own. Starting with Shelley. Shelley Barrett Parsons is the Executive Director for Capital Trees. Shelley is a leader and collaborator that cares deeply about the relationship between people and the natural environment. She believes that green space provides a connection to our best selves, to one another, and to nature. Shelley earned her Master's of Divinity and PhD from Union Presbyterian Seminary. She can tell us more about her spiritual alignment with her work and how Capital Trees is so invested in environmental stewardship. Shelley, would you like to begin?
Yeah, good morning, and thank you for having us today. It's an honor to be able to speak here, and also thank you for the support you've had for Capital Trees and our upcoming project. So Capital Trees really began in 2010, so we're close to our 15-year anniversary, when women in the city noticed absences in tree wells in particular and the loss of the urban tree canopy. And that's really what got us started. It was first starting with tree wells and thinking about how can we replace street trees. And it led to our first project. It led to our first project, which was along 14th Street, which I'll show you in a second. Since our founding in 2010, we've focused our work in three areas of building a greener and more livable Richmond, which is around building public landscapes, managing public landscapes, and educating and advocating about the value of public green space. Hopefully they're not going to keep forwarding without my sometimes I don't know what happens when I make these slideshows. So this is a sampling of the work we have done to date. We had four major projects. The first was this 14th Street tree well project, and I really think that changed the trajectory of Capital Trees' works. Like I said, they saw tree wells, wanted to plant trees in them, and then there's a couple of things you realize about tree wells pretty quickly is that they are a good place to plant trees, but not the ideal place to plant trees, and what helps to build thriving communities and trees to thrive is the ecosystem surrounding them. And this is a very special project because they're bioretention tree wells, so they dug out and put in water catchment systems. The trees are a little bit lower below the surface level of the sidewalk, and so the water coming down 14th Street enters into those tree wells and filters it. But it really did inspire us to broaden our work to Great Shiplap Park, the Lowline Garden, and the Lowline Green, and look at the larger picture of what surrounds the trees and the community and the ecosystem surrounding the trees. So we did major renovations at Great Shiplap Park, the gardens along the Virginia Capitol Trail, which we call the Lowline Gardens, and then at the flood wall in 2020 completed a project called the Lowline Green. And some things that we learned a lot over time and have changed our practices a bit. We've always been committed to native plants, but what you could get in 2010, 11, and 13 is a lot different in terms of sources and stock that you can get here in 2024. So most of our projects are about 70% native, and we do state native or relative cultivar. We can certainly talk about the choices. Some of that has to do with what works best in an urban landscape. But our latest projects move to closer to 80% natives as we can. But I think one of the big things that we learned is that you can't plant these places and forget it. So another big part of what we do is management. These are our Happy Earth Week posters you can see along the low line that give you a little bit of sense of the power of public landscapes. And this is an example of one of the things that we were early committed to, which was stormwater management and improving the water that enters the James. And so the 14th Street project does that. We have 2 rain gardens that are completed projects, and then riparian buffers, all which help capture water, slow the flow of it, and improve it as it enters the James. But like I said, one of the things that we really started to focus on was management, which I'll talk about in a second. But in our build area, we continue to be committed to increasing tree canopy throughout Richmond, doing projects both within the city of Richmond, and we're now partnering with Henrico County on some pilot projects at parks and schools to increase tree canopy and prioritize areas that have historically lacked for tree canopy. And that's something that Capital Trees is growing into and learning more about. And again, as Lisa mentioned, trees do equal clean air. They can filter about 784,000 tons of pollution annually. And we just did an Earth Day event at Henrico, out at Henrico Parks. And we had a spinner wheel, and one of the questions was it true or false? True or false, 1 street tree can provide enough oxygen for 2 people for an entire year. Most everybody said false, it's true. But just 1 street tree can provide enough oxygen for 2 people for 1 year. Yeah, I'll find the source if you want to see it. I did look it up this morning to make sure it was. Yeah. So street trees are still important, but we just have to be careful about how we plant and take care of them too, so that they remain viable, long-living sources of healthier air. So in part of our build, we are still working to increase tree canopy and to continue to build public landscapes, because we feel strongly about how public landscapes and tree canopy improve the community and build community, nurture community, create a sense of space. And so our next project is out at Hotchkiss Field Community Center. We've been looking into this since about 2021. Began to do engagement in 2022 with the community, visiting with a church out that way, with St. Elizabeth's, Highland Park Quality of Life, going out to the farmers market, meeting with stakeholders at Hotchkiss Field Community Center to really begin to identify what could be done to transform about 2 acres of space on the property in partnership with Parks and Rec. And so we have plans, we are permitted, and we are just negotiating price with contractors right now.
Tell them where that is.
Oh, on the north side of Richmond, off Brooklyn Park, in the Highland Park neighborhoods. And so we aim to break ground in June. It will have a permeable asphalt trail. One of the things that neighbors and users and park leadership, the on-the-site park leadership, so Coach Anthony in particular, talked about connectivity and folks wanting a way to walk within the community center property, so to be able to drop kids off at practice and walk a loop. So you can see we've added in a trail that will create a loop around the center, connecting sidewalks. Pollinator-friendly habitats were important for the community garden that's on site. because right now it's a kind of swath of grass and not really pollinator friendly. And then places to sit and rest, and also increase shade. We'll be putting in at least 54 shade trees on site, so it should help reduce the urban heat island effect that's part of that property right now. This gets to really one of the, I think, increasingly important things that Capital Trees does, which is sustainable management. Not only do we continue to want to increase tree canopy and build public landscapes, but we sort of backed our way into this by building public landscapes, which as it turns out, as Amy knows, like you can't build it and leave it. They don't grow like just naturally the way you want them to. I should say my previous life, I was a campus pastor, and our campus ministry center was in a house built in 1843 on the National Register of Historic Places. And one of my first days with Capital Trees, walking along the low line, I was like, oh my God, I have traded one management project for another, but because green spaces do take attention to stay transformative places that people want to be a part of, and we're committed to it in sustainable ways to build and engage community. So it's one way that we work to build community and connection to the spaces with neighbors surrounding the projects. We are committed to sustainable management from an environmental perspective, which means improving the ecosystem and adapting to climate change. So we do a lot of manual weeding. We do not use pesticides and herbicides in the garden. We do not use synthetic fertilizers. We look at all the ways that we can manage the gardens while improving the ecosystem and making it a place that wildlife can also thrive, and insects. If you ever want to take part in that, they come out every Wednesday. I know some folks from the church here are there with us every Wednesday, helping take part in the sustainable management. I will pause and say we do some systemic application of herbicides on invasive species management, but that's not within the garden. And then we look at financially sustainable ways to continue to take care of the landscape. But I think this is really one of the most important things Capital Trees provides to the community, is looking at those best practices for sustainable management and the ways that a public landscape stays a destination for the community and for wildlife and insects and others. Yes, and so this is just part of our commitments. We do not apply systemic herbicides or pesticides to our garden beds to really build a place that nesting bees and songbirds and mockingbirds and cardinals will all be able to thrive. And if Lisa Trapp, our program and outreach manager, were here, she would talk to you about how our native bees, some of them like to go into the hollow stems of our plants. So another thing you'll see out there in the winter is we don't cut them down anymore because they're a food source and shelter for native wildlife. Our final area of focus is around education, both internally and externally. So we do offer education through our volunteer program. This is our weekly volunteers getting tree pruning expertise from the urban forester, Michael Webb. We are educating right now, if you go out to the trail with our signage, about the importance of urban landscapes for environmental sustainability. This is a growing area for us to develop programs. And then our board takes seriously further education through both diversity and equity training, and here we visit other public landscapes to hear about best practices. So this is the Science Museum, and hearing about their opportunities and challenges with their new green space. And then finally, we were part of a coalition of folks that helped establish Richmond as a bee city, to establish some pollinator-friendly practices and principles and education in the broader community that includes creating pollinator-friendly habitats, reducing pesticide, and advocating for best practices and uses on the public and park spaces throughout the city. And that's it for me. Thank you.
Okay, next I'm happy to introduce Amy Wentz. Amy is the co-founder of Southside Relief, a community-based organization committed to environmental justice in South Richmond. Their goal is to improve the life expectancy and quality of life for Southside residents by increasing green spaces, reducing pollution, and improving infrastructure. In her full-time work, she serves as the Director of Outreach and Engagement at the Commonwealth Institute. Amy, please tell us more about your nonprofit and how and why you became active. Amy.
Can you hear me now? No? Still? Nope. Let's try this. Hello? Yay! Hi, everyone. All right. So I'm Amy Wentz. I am a pretty much almost lifelong Richmonder. I served some time in the Army, so I was away for a little while in Afghanistan. But for the most part, I've been here all my life. Proud graduate of Richmond Public Schools. And I grew up in the, Southside area. And it drew me back. When I came back to Richmond after the Army, I was like, you know what? I think I want to go back to my home roots. And so, is that working?
It's the way it was saved. I can just advance it.
No worries.
Like, is this right?
Yeah, you can go back to the first. Okay. So Southside Relief, my partner, Sheree Shannon, she is on the right there. She's actually been here before to speak. But we started out because both of us worked on the Richmond 300 master planning process. And so the General Assembly requires localities to go through a master planning process every 30 or so years. And I sat on the Economic Development Committee, and she sat on the Environmental Committee. And we all received like an insights report from PDR that had all of these facts and figures and statistics about Richmond and each of the districts. And so whether it was transportation, land use, education levels, how many households graduated from high school, proximity to park space, there were so many different qualifiers. And what we both realized was that the areas that we lived in Southside, unfortunately scored the lowest on almost every category, if not every category. So we primarily focus in the 8th and 9th districts, and we were just kind of like, this is not good. And so we started looking at just organizations that already exist, and saw that there wasn't one really focused on specific Southside needs as it relates to environmental justice causes and climate action. And so we were like, you know what, we should probably do something about this and start to educate our community on what's going on, because a lot of the issues that we were suffering from kind of intersected with environmental issues. And so you can go to the next one. So we plan, educate, and advocate for healthy people and communities. So we do this, in 3 ways. Number one, educating our community. There are a lot of times when you're in a community that's been neglected for a long time, there are a lot of other issues that you focus on. Environment and climate action just seems so far away. Like, if you're thinking about your current space right now, it seems like we're okay, so people don't really think about it. It's not front of mind. So they tend to focus on things that are front of mind, like, violence in their communities, or wanting, the desire for safer communities. They tend to think about where they're going to be going to work and how we can get livable wage jobs and housing costs and things that are right in front of us. And so one of the things that we realized is that we needed to kind of educate our communities about the importance of these topics. The other thing that we realized is that a lot of our folks in the community have bad relationships with trees sometimes, and so they can cause their pipes if they're if a tree that was planted in the wrong place, or someone didn't think about the longevity of the tree, planted it in a certain place, those roots start to go into the pipes, which could be a pretty costly thing when you're having to deal with plumbing issues. And then sometimes trees fall down, and not because trees normally fall down, but because they're not being maintained, or they're not healthy, and nobody's really maintaining that. And it's not the first thing that you work on, like when you have issues with your house. There's more important things that, people think are more important, like, electricity and HVAC and things like that. So it could be costly to maintain trees. And so one of the things that we've been doing is trying to repair people's relationships with trees. So we're working right now on like a home-to-home program where we can kind of help folks, because primarily when we do tree work, we're doing street trees and public trees in public spaces. But what we found is that if we want the community to be advocating alongside us and with us, that we have to make sure that the trees right there at their own homes are healthy and that they have good experiences with those trees. So that's education. Then planting projects. We do a series of we do a fall tree planting and tree maintenance days on trees that we have planted in the past. And so we encourage our community members to come out with us and do that, as well as we try to maintain a tree for at least 3 years after it has been planted. So we do put a watering plan in where we utilize Groundwork RVA to do our watering, as well as members of our community. I don't know if you've ever been to a place where you'll see like a mobile detailer, that they have like a big tank on the back and they're doing cars in like parking lots and stuff. Well, we utilize them in the off season when they're not necessarily doing cars. They can fill up those tanks and go, so we can employ people from our community to also help with watering. And then the last thing is advocacy. I think that's where we kind of have been shining lately. There are quite a bit of things that we have been advocating for, just like the legislation that she talked about. Actually, we did the lobby day for VCN that helped push those bills through with the Chesapeake Bay Foundation right here in this room. Like, this was our mustering point before we headed over to the GA and talked to our legislators. And like she said, it was sadly vetoed. But we were really pushing for that legislation. But also here locally, we did not have an urban forester for a long time. And that was one thing that Sri and I, made appointments with our mayor, his administration, as well as every city council member, just to explain the importance of an urban forester and how we're all doing these great projects, but if there's no kind of like vision or strategy in it, we could end up with there's a tree that I guess someone on the books that they nailed down years and years and years ago, like planted all around Richmond, and that's why we have a lot of the problems that we have now, because they had this one tree that he liked and he just planted it all over the place. You can go to the next slide, because I can't even remember what the slides say. Okay, so the challenge. So the biggest thing that we saw when we saw the Insights report is that there was an up to 20-year life expectancy difference right here in our city, just between neighborhoods. So if you live in certain parts of Southside and then also certain parts of the East End, you are likely to pass away almost 20 years faster than other people. And I mean, there's a lot of different reasons why that happens, but a lot of it also tends to be the environments and their proximity to healthcare and things like that. So that's our challenge, and so that is our mission, is to decrease that life expectancy gap. At the same time, we were doing the Insights report. Jeremy Hoffman, the former chief scientist at the Science Museum, was also doing a heat study around the city and found that in those same areas where we have this life expectancy difference, there's also up to 16-degree difference on a hot day. And so you could be walking down Route 1 and it could be 16 degrees hotter than if you were in some of the neighborhoods off of Patterson and some of the other neighborhoods that had some really good urban planning back in the day. So there's been a lot of neglect. Next slide. So what we have seen is that not just it started out with annexation, right? The city of Richmond annexed a lot of parts of Southside that were originally Chesterfield County. There were some commitments that were made in those annexations that never really were kept, and so there was a lot of disinvestment. And then also the effects of redlining, which I'm sure you all have learned before here, about banks and insurance companies kind of putting red lines around certain neighborhoods, deeming them unworthy of investment, and mostly because of their proximity to Black families. And so we're dealing with a lot of the residual effects of redlining. Um, and then came urban renewal, where they said, like, we're going to put some, warehouse district, and we're going to do these great capital projects like highways and things like that ended up going through neighborhoods. And so because of a chain of a lot of events that happen, there's been historic disinvestment in a lot of the Southside areas and neighborhoods. And so that's why we tend to focus there. So our solution, we want to expand green spaces. So we are working to bring the Richmond 300, in the Richmond 300 plan, the plan is that every Richmonder have a park or green space that they can go to walk to within a 2-mile or 10-minute walk from their house. So they want every Richmonder to have that. And of course, where's the area that didn't exist? In Southside. And so we were able to work with Parks and Recreation to identify 5 public land spaces that we are now converting into public parks. And so that is one of the things that we're going to be doing in the next 10 years, is just bringing and onboarding those new parks. Building relationships with our neighbors. I mean, we can't do it alone, right? We want to make sure that our neighbors are at the center of all of the work that we do. And so we are learning to hear from neighbors who have been advocating in their neighborhoods for a very long time, and they just haven't been listened to, and they have a lot of great ideas. And so we're making sure that the parks that we're creating are spaces that they would like to see. And so I was really encouraged to see the walking trail on the plan that she talked about, because that's what neighbors wanted in some of these parks. They want safe spaces to be able to walk and get exercise, and we know that that's important. And then advocating for people-centered policy. I think that a lot of times in the city of Richmond, if you've been here for a while, like I have, you know that sometimes there can be a top-down approach to a lot of our solutions. And so we really want to, take a different approach to that and really get in with community. We were at Hillside yesterday, climbing trees with the kids. It was the most fun thing, and you wouldn't have ever thought that you could get a bunch of kids off of devices, and they were riding their bikes over and looking. Riverside Outfitters was there with the ropes and the headgear and all of the things, and they were just kind of like, should we do this? And all it took was one kid to get up there, and then they were all begging to climb trees. So just wanting to make sure that we, pair folks with the environment that they live in, and make sure that they understand the impacts of their voice and the decisions that are made around them. Some of our wins. We have planted over 1,000 trees or given away. We also use the tree equity scorecard from American Forest to target specific areas that have urban heat island effect, so that we do free tree giveaways in those areas, and we'll dispatch teams to go and plant at their homes. And then we also do our own tree. That's one of our giveaways there, where you see that people sign up for a specific tree, and then and they can either come pick it up if they know how to plant it, and we give them a planting guide, or we'll dispatch a team. We have held over 65 or attended community events in the past 5 years. Again, the 5 new parks in South Richmond. The first that we're going to be working on is off of Ernest Road, off of Route 1. And the newly created urban forester position. We're very proud of that. Next, we're trying to tackle the city's 30-year tree ordinance that hasn't been updated in 30 years. So that's our next big topic. And then we launched a Southside Greening Working Group, where we had community members come and learn about topics each month. And so now they help steward a lot of our trees in our community gardens, and just kind of working with the tree stewards to sponsor tree steward classes, so that members of our community can become tree stewards and begin to do pruning and things, and helping with tackle some of the trees that are in Richmond. All right, so this was just a message from Mayor Stoney in his speech that he gave to help about outstanding community experts, we've made the intentional effort to designate the first new park space since the 1970s in communities of color, and we're asking the community what they want to see in those spaces, thanks to organizations like Southside Relief. We also had a bit of I don't want to call it a fight, a disagreement with our mayor earlier this year on trying to bring a burn tower to one of our park spaces, Hickory Hill, one of our historic park spaces in Richmond. And so, you know, I'm happy to report that we have repaired the relationship, and we are moving, we defeated that burn tower going into the park, and things are looking better with the relationship between us and the administration. But this is a picture of Broad Rock Creek. This is an area of town that had two apartment complexes right in the Belmead area. And the apartments got raised in the early 90s, I believe. It was right around the time of, you know, there was a lot of violence spiking up during that time. And these particular apartment complexes seemed to be the center of a lot of that. And I think that the solution at that time was just kind of just to raise them. But they stayed raised for all of this time. And so invasives kind of took over. But because no developer was there to kind of mess with the land, it just kind of kept its beauty. And so they realized, the city was like, wait a minute, this is land that, you know, this is on our books. This area has no park near it. Like, this would be a perfect space. And so we took a walk, and this is a picture when we were on our walk with Ryan Wren from Parks and Rec. And there's this beautiful creek that runs right through it that already has existing bridges because it was an apartment complex back in the day. And so just now, taking neighbors through to reimagine this space has just been a pure joy. They didn't even know that it existed in that neighborhood because it had been kind of raised for so long. Next slide. Okay, so what's next for us? We just got funded for our Cool Our City campaign, where we will be encouraging about planting trees, green spaces, and community gardens. It has the benefits of trees, but in a really artistic and beautiful way for our community. And so we're gonna be doing murals and posters and putting art on bus shelters and just really utilizing community spaces and using art to tell, to educate. And so we're looking forward to that. Building capacity, there's so much need. So we're attempting to do some hiring. We were able to hire our first 2 staff members last year, thanks to a capacity building grant. So we do have a part-time outreach and engagement coordinator, Lisa, as well as a program manager, Stephanie. And so definitely thankful for them, but looking to hire some project-based managers as well. The Greening Southside Master Plan, so we have created like a template for community-driven planting processes that really center community, and so just working to strengthen that plan and getting it out to folks. And yeah, just continuing to advocate on behalf of our neighbors and with our neighbors. And I think, let me see, I think the last slide, yep, it's just about staying connected with Southside Relief. You know, you can always email us. We're on all the socials through our website. But we'd love to have you at one of our planting events, and look forward to answering questions now.
Thank you, Amy. Yeah. It's an impressive list of accomplishments. Yeah. So now we have a few questions for you, okay? And I'll start with this one, and one or both of you can respond. When many of us hear the term social justice, we think of housing or education first, usually. Please talk with us about how your work in historically redlined areas creates more equitable communities.
Yeah, so I think that sometimes the word justice kind of scares folks. So when we go and do these talks, a lot of times we let folks know we are an environmental justice organization, and people kind of look at, because you know, when you think of tree work and environmental work, sometimes it's happy and you know it's a great space, but the bottom line is there has been a lot of neglect, and it was due to racial issues, and unless we really call that out and really be mindful of that, there's no way to really get around it. I think that the key to it is understanding that neighbors have been advocating on behalf of themselves. They have been calling out things in their neighborhoods that don't seem right, that don't feel equal to other neighborhoods. But unfortunately, the power has just never shifted in a way that allowed them to be able to be heard and that action to be able to be taken towards that. And so I think what's happening now is that as we do talks in areas that aren't Southside, it also gets folks to realize how they have to advocate for people even when their neighborhood is fine. And so I have my friends that live on Wythe Avenue and my friends that live off of Patterson and Grove that get to walk, to a great park space and have a beautiful tree canopy around their neighborhoods. And so now when they hear things in the budget and hear things come up and they're just like, getting the conversation started about why we're not, doing these things in Southside. So just making sure that we take a community approach to understanding that that we all have a voice, and even if we're not out there like, protesting and doing those things, it's easy to say to your council person or to a person in charge that says, hey, listen, I really would like for you to think about these neighborhoods, when you're working on the budget. We're thankful that our neighborhood has all these great amenities and we are doing great over here, but we'd like some focus. I think that sometimes the council people need encouragement to know that it's okay for them to look beyond their districts.
I think for me, part of the answer to the question about social justice is definitely grounded in my own faith. And I think about the concept of peace and that word shalom, and that peace is about well-being and health and wholeness. It's not just about the absence of war and the absence of conflict, which are certainly markers of peace, but a peaceful God's kingdom will look like a place where everybody is thriving. And I think that's one way to come at this from a social justice perspective. What drew me to this coming out of ministry was kind of learning what I already knew inherently or theologically that science is now like jumping to figure out too, which is that green spaces improve mental health, they improve physical health, they improve community health. And if we buy into that we love God, self, and neighbor, then if our neighbor is not in a space where they can look out the window and look at a tree and reduce their blood pressure, ease pain management, or feel connected to a community, then that is really important to do. And I think I took it for granted. I grew up in close proximity to a park that, kind of across the street, down the road, close enough to get there whenever, far enough into the woods to get into trouble because our moms couldn't find us one day. So I think kind of, like you said, having folks step outside their context. If you live in a green neighborhood, if you live with access to a park, that was Kentwood Park in Raleigh, but now my kids can bike to Deep Run, and just really help people raise awareness. I guess where I live, the other social justice issue is that people, like you said too, can get in a bubble and only see the neighborhood that surrounds them. I'm surprised at the number of people who don't come downtown, for example. Haven't been to the South Side or the East End, and if you haven't, then it's really easy to assume everybody has what you have, and then to assume it's all fine. So I think all of that is what makes it important from a social justice perspective. One, to advocate and draw people in, and two, to really prioritize the well-being of the entire community, not just the people that we look like, that we recognize, or that are our neighbors. So that's what drew me to it.
Good perspective, thank you. So in addition to the science-based benefits of mitigating heat and air and water quality, talk with us about the added benefits of neighborhood unity and pride, and maybe how it influences the next generation, if that's applicable.
Neighborhood unity. So I think that the green spaces, community gathering places, community gardens are just great places to just gather community in general and just be at one with folks. I think that in Southside, just looking at the history, they were really civic, not HOAs, but civic associations. They were civic association heavy, and so there were there was a lot of like neighborhood civic associations that when I did my like research on all of the neighborhoods, they were really committed to that work and really being civically engaged. I think that over time, though, when I look at the plans that these groups made and like with government and see how they were shelved and how they just never kind of made it to an action, I could see how neighbors could get frustrated and say, you know what, I'm not going to go to that meeting anymore. I'm not going to. We tell them all the time, like when they're like, oh, we got to do community engagement. Well, first we have to acknowledge the things that they have said over the last decades and haven't. I've dusted off a Blackwell plan that was made in like the early 90s, and like I was just looking at all the things that the community said that they really wanted, and then I look at the CIP budgets after that and realized that they were never really prioritized, even though that they came to the table to do this work all the time and came to the community meetings. So I think that was the thing that I expressed to the administration and as well as to the department heads, is that when we engage community, we really have to have some action behind it, because folks will get frustrated and they'll kind of push away. So it's really important that leaders and that folks with power work to transfer that power and empower others to be able to advocate, and then also put money behind the things that they say that they're going to do. Because we can keep coming and making plans and asking for input, and if that input is never taken into account and worked on, then people can get really frustrated.
Yeah, I think the other thing about communities, I was just thinking too, like I was nodding my head because there are all these shelved green space plans, not just in the Southside. There's the Cannon Creek Green, there's plans, and it is frustrating to kind of not see them come to fruition. The other thing about green space is when you have green space, there's a 25, I think the number's around 25% reduction in crime, and then it's not only a reduction in it, people feel safer. So I don't know which comes first. You feel safer because you have a nice, and I always want to say nice and well cared for green space, because really that's the second part of it, is the long-term maintenance and care for the spaces, because that shows investment in the community, that shows ongoing investment, not also a promise to do something and then kind of walk away and leave it to someone else to figure out. So it's hard to know, chicken and egg, which comes first. So the green space, the long-term care, but all of that leads to people wanting to be outside with one another, get to know your neighbors, and really know who your neighbor is. I mean, I think that's the most important other aspect, is when you're out walking on a trail every day, you start realizing who lives next door to you, and I think particularly in a post-COVID world, that might be one of the things we have lost the most. I'm pretty sure some of my neighbors do not know I have an 18-year-old, because we moved here in 2019. The pandemic started in March of 2020. He's a particularly not social person and shy, and all that's happened in the pandemic, they probably don't know he exists, except until we put a graduation flag out here in the next few weeks. But I think that's also the power of proximate green spaces, is you figure out who your neighbors are.
Okay, well, one last question before I open it up to the audience here, and that is, are there opportunities for our church members to volunteer or become more active in your organizations?
We are always looking for volunteers. I mean, we tend to focus on our community members and neighbors in Southside first, only because we don't want it to ever seem like we are planting folks in to come and do work for them. We'd rather we do it with them. But there's so much work to be done, and there's always opportunities to connect. And so as long as folks that come in understand that we value our neighbors advocating and doing work for themselves, then we're always welcome to including you in our work.
Okay.
Yeah, the short answer is yes. We're happy to receive volunteers in a variety of ways. I would say our biggest challenge right now, aside from the ongoing work at the 6 acres along the low line, is finding places for the next places to plant the trees, the next places to manage, to really capitalize on the energy that's there. But yes, we do welcome volunteers.
Okay. I know you have burning questions out there. Michelle.
Could you speak to that, and again, how we
Yeah, thank you for your question. I'm not familiar with the term about mini forests, so I'll let you say that. But I'll just talk a little bit about the legislation that we had up that unfortunately the governor vetoed. But basically, it was an incentive for localities to be able to have ordinances that would, if a developer had wanted to make a development and they had to decrease the canopy on that area by a certain percentage, they would have a choice. They could either commit to not tearing that stuff down or doing some replanting, or they could put an amount of money into a fund that would then allow for trees to be planted. And so it was, I mean, we actually had the home builders. I mean, there were a lot of groups that initially weren't really down for tree ordinances because they didn't want to have to, when they come in to develop an area, they didn't want to have to really think about that. We had a lot of folks on board because there were a lot of options. Right now, unfortunately, in the city of Richmond, there is nothing on the books that deters folks from not cutting down trees unless there's like, there's neighbors that say, hey, listen, I see what you're trying to do here. I've looked at the plans. You don't really have to cut down this beautiful white oak, or, like somebody to actually say something, but they don't have to by law because there's no ordinance on the books. That's another reason why we want to kind of get that looked at. But yeah, it's just really sad because we got the House and the Senate both passed it. And so we had made it further this year than we had ever made it before. And it was like literally in the midnight hour. We had been refreshing all day. And then it was interesting because the next day we had to go to the Environment Virginia conference up at VMI, and Governor Youngkin was the keynote speaker. And so we had to kind of stand there and be like, we're talking about God's blessings. And if you ever heard our governor speak, he talks a lot about God's blessings and, in nature and how we should be good stewards. But I was just like, why don't you? So the long story short is that we are working on legislation to try to do that. Unfortunately, there are a lot of folks with money that really don't want the issue of having to prioritize trees, and unfortunately, they end up winning out. But we're not going to stop trying. We're going to continue year after year to take this legislation up to try to get peace in the valley, is what they say at the General Assembly.
Top of my mind, and I don't know a lot of details because we really do urban and community forestry, I do think the Department of Forestry has resources for landowners. And I don't know about your relationship, but we have a great relationship with our urban forester through the Department of Forestry. I find them to be priceless in terms of the resources they provide, the willingness to come on site. So for large scale, I think there are other options outside of urban environments, and they've been nothing but a great resource for us to work with. It is interesting about the trees from an economic perspective, because I was reading stuff this morning, and it improves the value of both business and residential properties when there are trees and green space present. So there are economic values if you have to appeal to not to the religious, theological, or ethical values to having trees and green space. Microforest. So my understanding is a Japanese concept of really taking a finite space, pretty small, less than an acre, planting it tight with trees and shrubs and bushes and creating this small forest. And it does have really great ecosystem benefits, like it can cool the air, filter it, it gets some wildlife places to live. I just don't think we've tried it. My best bet for you would be to talk to Kui Nguyen from DPR, Department of Parks and Rec. She is, I don't know what her title is, but she does a lot of tree stuff for the parks. And I think that's up her alley, and it's really finding a place to do that, because that's more like a renaturalization type project, sort of like your stream bank restorations, and that you wouldn't go back in and do a lot of maintenance. And you do try to plant it so tight that your invasives don't take hold. But yeah, I've heard about it. I just don't know that we've tried it anywhere yet.
Question, the urban forester, is that going to be a city employee, or is it with Department of Forestry?
Yeah.
Oh yeah, I use the term interchangeably.
Okay.
Yeah, there's an urban forester for the city,
Yeah.
but then also the Department of Forestry has regional urban foresters that we work close with as well. As a matter of fact, the head of the Department of Forestry was just here planting a tree for Arbor Day at the Science Museum. And I mean, we pitched a livable communities concept to him, and he was just like, let's do it. So we have a meeting with him next week. But that department is very much willing to work with anybody who wants to work with them about urban or just forestry in general. Trees is the answer. He has a little sticker that says "Trees the answer." He pulls it out of his pocket. So he's all about wanting to work with communities.
And again, Michelle, I would urge you to contact Department of Forestry because when it comes to tree harvesting, if a landowner adheres to best management practices, and that requires replanting, then they can cut more in the tree stand. So there are some gives and takes on that. So they could explain it to you, and you might be able to find much of it on their website. Okay. Any other questions, David?
So there are a lot of organizations that are doing something similar to what you all are doing. Is there any group that has stepped forward and coordinates, helps you best practices, advocates?
Yeah, so we actually have just had our first, I would say, convening of like pretty much all the tree folks that are doing tree work at the University of Richmond. I'm not sure if you are familiar, but they have a eco corridor there. And so the faculty and staff there invited us all out for a dinner and a talk where we just kind of brainstormed, and just, bid in community with each other. I think that we're, at least the partners that are in Southside, we've done a really good job of kind of defining our lanes. Groundwork RVA that works a lot heavily in Southside kind of focuses on workforce and like building youth into careers that go into greening. Like I said, we have taken on more of like the advocacy and policy space and like educating our community, where we have another member of our community, Duran Chavis with Beautiful RVA, focuses on urban farming. And like, so we've kind of like started to simplify and know like what our lanes are, and then we to figure out ways to convene and work together. A lot of the work that you see being done is done in partnership with groups, and so we never do anything alone. We're either doing it with the Chesapeake Bay Alliance for the Chesapeake Bay Foundation, or with other community partners. Like yesterday's tree climbing event we did with Groundwork RVA and Riverside Outfitters. It was totally a partnership. So yeah, we're finding ways to lean on each other and to learn from each other.
Okay.
Yeah, I would say too, like Capital Trees is committed to collaboration. So sometimes it's just simply a phone call to say, hey, this has come across our desk, our radar. We don't want to step on anybody's feet. Is this something you're working on? Is one thing. We're committed to collaborating with folks. We're part of the East End Green Infrastructure. I don't think we're as organized as Southside Green Infrastructure Group, but we're part of a group because of our work along the low line with the folks doing greening work in the East End. And have the same thing. We meet like quarterly and talk about projects and find areas to collaborate on. And that is an area that Capital Trees is more and more working towards, is collaborating with other partners and bringing folks in. Like Groundwork is working with us on doing thermal mapping at the Hotchkiss project, which we're really excited about because grant and funders want tangible differences to measure, which, by the way, when you plant a tree and some perennials is like a 5 to 10 year, not a 1 year metric. So we're excited to do that thermal mapping with their youth green team over the next 3 years, and then hopefully we could come back in 5 so that we can see the temperatures on the ground before construction, I guess during, and then after to see the heat island, hopefully improvements. There'll be we are putting in a permeable asphalt trail, so that's been a moral dilemma to me, that water, the opportunity for it to be permeable, but then putting in asphalt, which is hot, but so we're doing that work with them, and then they're gonna teach our board 3 times over the next few years about the thermal mapping and the data collection. So yeah, I think for the most part, everybody in the space is collaborative and picks up the phone and calls and talks to folks.
I just wanted to share too that just being a part of this process, when we did our first call, she had mentioned that she went to Union Theological Seminary, and I was like, you know what? My dad went to Union Theological Seminary. My mom went to Presbyterian School of Christian Education, PSCE, and so I grew up at Three Chop Presbyterian and found out that she was a Presbyterian pastor. So I was like, so even just this experience doing this brought us closer together, so I'm sure that we will also partner in the future.
Thank you. Any last burning question? Yes.
Talking about the East End, do you know whether the contract that RIJ has with the redevelopment of Creighton, are they required to put trees there? Because there are still a few beautiful old trees there, but some have been torn down and that. And is that, since we don't have a city requirement, is RIJ requiring it as they work with these developers to redevelop the community, the public housing?
Yeah, I'll say that I don't know the answer to that. I know that HUD has some lofty, not necessarily sustainable requirements, but I would have to look at that. I don't know for sure. But for the most part, no. Folks can do what they want, and it's really a shame. If you ever just drive through like some of our housing communities, especially Hillside, they have the most beautiful trees. And I don't know if y'all remember, there was in the news like last year, they cut down a bunch of trees, and like, folks started noticing like these huge, beautiful trees. The city just started cutting them down. So yeah, that's another thing that we're trying to work to, is like making sure DPW understands, like a lot of times they just want to take a mower through. They don't want to have to deal with a lot of the other stuff, but it's so important. So just also, as we go into this new mayor's race, right, we are part of the mayorathon, and just having questions that ask those intentional questions of our candidates, like making sure that we have candidates that understand the importance of these things. So as they're thinking about their cabinets and who's going to be working with them, that we get folks in there that have sustainability, climate action, and just our environmental greening needs like to heart.
Well, at Creighton, I noticed that it's the trees between the street and the sidewalk are typically the ones that are still standing. The ones inside the fence are the ones that were bulldozed. So does the city own those trees between the sidewalk and the street?
Yeah,
Yes,
and
okay.
it was the city that tore them. And then they had the excuse that they gave was like really not a good excuse at all. And so I think that they kind of got caught with their pants down a little bit. And yeah, they had to come out and say that they were wrong, because they were. But like I said, we don't want those trees in Hillside to go away ever. They're the most beautiful trees in this city. And like I said, the kids were in there hanging from them yesterday. It was just the cutest thing you could ever see. But yeah, we're going to be working to, like I said, that policy advocacy is very important.
Okay. Well, it's time to wrap it up, and we thank you all for coming, and we thank both of our speakers here, and we commend you for your work in creation care. So appreciate it.
Thank you all.